everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a good one for you, as always, as we are live this Monday afternoon here, and we got some pretty important stories to talk about. We're starting in with China, as the little bit of a, I guess you could say, scuffle dispute with the balloon over the weekend has certainly raised quite a lot of questions about what exactly China was doing, how the United States has chosen to handle it, and what it means really for the future of U.S.-China relations. Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar back here stateside has been kicked off one of the most powerful House committees in Washington. Let's take a look at how she responded to it, and how some of her more supportive colleagues responded to it, and why she was kind of kicked off in the first place. We'll take you as well to Chicago, where Mayor Lori Lightfoot is facing a pretty challenging re-election campaign, and it seems to be an uphill battle with a more right-wing guy than her and a more left-wing guy than her challenging her. We'll break it down for you. Also, cities are spending more to brutalize homeless people than it would cost to house them, a new report says. Luke Savage and Jacobin will break that down for us. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a great show for you today. Welcome to Newsflash. Everyone, we are starting today with China. We're going with the New York Times here on this one, so it's going to be interesting to see. I may not, like exactly what some of their narrative is on this, but I think it's going to be still kind of important to get some of the basic facts. This is by David Pearson in the New York Times. The Chinese balloon that bumbled its way across the United States has launched 1,000 questions about its real intent, but it is also focusing the world's attention on the prospect that communications and control within Chinese leader Xi Jinping's government and his vaunted security apparatus may be less coherent or even less functional than the image he so confidently projects. The stakes today are high. Relations between Washington and Beijing have frayed, and competition between the two sides has intensified, fueling fears that the one wrong move could spark an accidental confrontation between the powerful rivals. And I mean, so far, I think any objective look at this sees, up until obviously this balloon situation, which we know so little about, and so much of the information has come from people. And again, when you're looking at information with China here, the most important thing is you got to look at some of the vested interests. You got to look at who is telling you this stuff, why are they telling you, and what interests, valid interests, and vested interests do they have in getting you to believe X thing about China. And I think it's clear that the U.S. kind of foreign policy establishment for a long time has been incredibly afraid of China and trying to counter China and trying to make sure China is held to account and all that kind of stuff. But really had done quite a bit of kind of saber rattling towards China rhetorically, and especially kind of in the wake of COVID and all that stuff. So it's been a bit of a contentious situation. But this spy balloon, I guess you could call it, it's like, again, it really just seems like, it seemed honestly on its face, it just seems so ridiculous to me, because it's a spy balloon, 60,000 feet up in the air or whatever. Some woman saw it in Montana, I guess, and reported it. And apparently they've just been sending them out all over the world. There's some speculation this could be a weather balloon of some kind, but it just generally shows that this is just a really kind of crazy situation, because there is no there's no real kind of clear espionage purpose that this could pose. Is it mapping out every this satellite imagery of everyone? This is not. There's so much of this rhetoric relies on the assumption that people think it's like World War II again, where the spy planes the CIA launched from the coast of Japan to satellite the Soviet Union. That's what was really revolutionary at the time. No, satellites have been up in the air for quite a long time. Everybody knows every depth and inch of the Earth in these countries. There's millions, or maybe not millions, but hundreds of thousands of satellites up in space, and so it's hard to really. Again, I'm not a military person. I don't know. I think that military people want to give me the most accurate information, but I still think that it seems very, very hard to, just look at the situation and say, okay, here's what a balloon could do to harm us. So I think China was saying it is gathering meteorological data. Was China maintaining, it was a civilian airship that had flown off course while gathering weather data. You know what I'm saying? I just can't say that word for whatever reason. But anyway, so yeah, the China says the vessel was the U.S. says the vessel was a high-altitude surveillance balloon. Whether the inflatable craft was there by mistake or a brazen military stunt, its emergence raises questions about how China is navigating its growing position as a global power. So yeah, questions are being raised. And again, I think the most important thing to look at here is who is raising these questions. Why do they want these questions to be raised? And, does it raise any questions about our own government? Like, why are they telling us that this relatively unthreatening looking balloon, why is there so much hype around it from, all of the media, and there's just kind of competition to be more excited when the balloon was shot down, pressure Biden to shoot down the balloon, and of course only Fox had it live as it was shot down, but it does kind of show that this it does kind of show that there is a bit of a it could have just been a weather balloon. Now they're saying they've seen more in other South American countries that aren't necessarily opposed to China as much as the United States are. So, the truth may honestly never come out about this situation, because obviously China's word isn't golden either. But based on my prior knowledge and based on what I, perceive based on my understanding of the world to be the most likely situation here, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just a damn weather balloon and people inside the United States government are trying to hype this story up to make it look better or, more scary with regards to China or make things look more scary with regards to China than they actually are, because, again, there's a big incentive for people inside the United States government to do that, because, the next conflict always needs to happen. There always needs to be a, drive towards holding China accountable, and a lot of business interests are tied up in China, and that is something, the United States relationship with China needs to be kept a certain way. That is just a fact. And that, there are many levers of the government devoted towards keeping it in a certain way. And if one element that may not be too favorable to the United States has undue power, it could threaten U.S. business interests. And so, yeah, China, for just blatantly, is a country that needs to be watched. And it's been needed to be watched as the United States national security state since the Chinese Revolution. But the reasons have changed, but it still remains a state of high interest for the United States government. What has been particularly damaging for China, both internationally and domestically, are the questions this raises about competence and how they're reinforcing doubts about Xi Jinping's leadership, said Susan Shirk, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the Clinton administration and author of the recent book, Overreach: How China Derailed Its Peaceful Ride. So she was probably one of the most. The Clinton administration was incredibly influential in making China the powerhouse that it is by kind of off-shifting so much of the United States economic assets, expanding businesses, and allowing China to kind of profit off of more cheap labor for producing goods that would eventually be consumed by Americans who had lost tons of jobs in NAFTA. It is that NAFTA obviously. NAFTA is not the one I'm thinking of there. To be clear, I do recognize that NAFTA is a North American situation, but it does come, the trade with China, the diplomacy with China under Bill Clinton in the 1990s, and the opening with Deng and all that was greatly expanded. It's unclear to what degree that incident was avoidable, but it comes at a time Xi is thought to be at the peak of his powers and having shattered norms last year by securing a third term and making national security a cornerstone of his rule. And again, I think another thing you got to be careful of when you're kind of processing United States media is the immense and kind of incessant doom-mongering about the Xi Jinping government. Like, I don't know how many times the smart people in the room about China were so certain that China was going to go, be absolutely crushed by zero COVID, and they're holding on for zero COVID too long, and then when they drop zero COVID, or the fact that they're dropping zero COVID and people are dying in the hospitals, that's what's going to do them in. Nope. China, they know what they're doing. I think that is something that a conclusion you cannot escape if you're looking at China's behavior over the past, especially 23 years. Since the turn of the century, 25, 30 years, it's been a tour de force of probably one of the most rapidly prosperous governments in history that spread the most wealth and economic prosperity to the most people in the least amount of time that we've seen in maybe all of history. But I think they know how to manage things, and they know how to they know how to kind of get things done here. But Ms. Shirk added, it's really quite a paradox if you think about it, because it's the beginning of his third term. He should be at a high point, yet we see all of this negative feedback. Yeah, where's this negative feedback coming from, you guys? It's crazy. Oh no, I think it's really just a, there's always going to be, and definitely there was more critics of the Xi government during COVID. And for a very good reason. But are those people now going to suddenly turn against the Xi government and support regime change? I think the attitude is, that a lot of Americans would kind of expect of them. No, it's a much more complicated, much less dramatic situation than a lot of Americans, especially a lot of Americans who are kind of at the leading power, the people who held important bureaucratic jobs in the national security and diplomacy kind of apparatus. They are very, very intent on selling you this narrative, which so far does not seem to be panning out. All right. My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps, make SWR content better, and thank you so much for listening. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go now to our next story. The House of Representatives voted 218 to 211 on Thursday to kick Ilhan Omar of Minnesota off the Foreign Affairs Committee. Why? According to the resolution, it was because Omar, by her own words, has disqualified herself from serving on the Committee on Foreign Affairs. It listed 4 statements by Omar and made pains to note that they had all been condemned by some of Omar's fellow House Democrats for being an anti-Semitic or anti-American, whatever those words mean in present-day politics. Omar spoke out for herself yesterday. This debate today is about who gets to be American. What opinions do we have to be counted as Americans? I am Muslim. I'm an immigrant. Is anyone surprised that I'm being targeted? For her part, Representative AOC of New York, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, said that one of the things that we should talk about here is the targeting and racism against Muslim Americans. This is about targeting women of color in the United States of America. The GOP's stated rationale is obvious nonsense. On the one hand, it's fair to say anti-Semitism is the last thing the Republican Party cares about, because the last thing the Republican cares about are racism and wealth inequality. On the other hand, anti-Semitism is perfectly fine with the GOP, as illustrated among endless examples. Among other endless examples, the continued acceptance of people like Paul Gosar and Marjorie Taylor Greene with the Jewish space lasers, and I think Kevin McCarthy literally said, Jews buy elections, and that's good. We like them when they buy elections for us, but not the other guys. But yeah, it's really some of the just least, and of course, obviously the real reason is she was not anti-Semitic. She was critical of Israel, which are two different things, and something that, as long as you're critical of Israel, you can be, at least in America, very anti-Semitic. You can be like Donald Trump, for example, and you won't get really punished for, being politically punished for being anti-Semitic in the same way, especially if you're kind of Republican, evangelical Zionist. You could be as anti-Semitic as you want. I mean, heck, your literal ideology is it depends on the death of Jews once they all get to Israel. Or once they all get to Israel, there'll be the starting of the apocalypse and all that stuff. But as long as you just say, right now at least, oh, we love Israel, we support Israel, Israel is the best place in the world, it's only all the the bullcrap that we always hear about Israel, then you will be treated fine. But if you say that that Israel, the country of Israel, has a lobby that is works in coordination with the Israeli government to influence American politics. I mean, she didn't even say that it was tied to the government. She just said the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, or one of the largest parts of the Israeli lobby, but by no means the only part, has major influence in Israel or in American politics and influences a bunch of our politicians. That is one of the most controversial things that she said, or like the 9/11 thing, which is so ridiculous. I think not even Democrats could kind of pretend to care about that one. But anyway, conservatives can't acknowledge the obvious reality that modern societies are run by huge corporations and the ultra-wealthy because they work for huge corporations and the ultra-wealthy. Instead, they're forced to come up with a nonsensical explanation for how the world works, which always involves an imagined secret elite. Jews are a perennial favorite, but it can also be unions or the gays or the international communist conspiracy or the space lizards wearing ultra-realistic human masks. In the confused minds of the right-wing base, it could be, all of those things at once. While it sounds a little presumptuous to say so, the explanations offered by Omar and Ocasio-Cortez for the GOP's actions are not the whole story. I think that is a key thing. I was watching those explanations, and it's good for John Schwartz to finally say it, because I really, I was watching those explanations, I was like, damn, it's well-spoken, well said by Rashida Tlaib, by AOC, and by Ilhan Omar, but the thing is, I was like, okay, wait, there's something missing here. What about the thing that you were actually criticized for? I mean, Republicans' response to this said, Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell were taken off the committee. They're not, Muslim women. They're not black women. This has to do with the anti-Semitic things that she said. Omar was the closest to the mark when she said this about a particular question. What opinions do we get to have? It is largely forbidden in elite U.S. circles to point out the existence and motivation of the Israeli lobby because you can get called anti-Semitic for noting that Boeing deeply enjoys selling direct munitions to Israel, or for having the temerity to agree with an Israeli prime minister who called the government potentially fascistic. You cannot suggest, as Omar did, that the U.S. should be judged in the same moral standards as others because our enemies kill in an irrational frenzy. Well, we have reasons. This squelching of open debate is naturally led by those who proclaim themselves the most vociferous opposition to cancel culture and political correctness. Those are the same people who are lining up to cancel the anti-Semitic, the horrific Ilhan Omar. And I think probably the most interesting fact is that this really represents how far things were from even like 2021, where we were looking at a completely different world where they would actually have come up and said this stuff. I think after that Iron Dome vote went so poorly for the left in AOC, and AOC kind of got, frankly, just yelled at in front of everyone by Nancy Pelosi, they are really uncomfortable saying anything too controversial about Israel because they have been hit incredibly hard for it, and there is no real good coordination between people on the outside, activists who are saying, keep it up, we got you, we supporting you, and connection with the base. So there really just seems to be, whereas they may have, proudly said that, Omar may have proudly said, I got criticized because I said the truth about Israel, which is an apartheid state, and all that stuff. And to her credit, AOC said this, but not on the House floor for everyone to see, the thing that got 1 million views. But it seems like they are just very, very uncomfortable drawing that really obvious connection as to why they were kicked off why she was kicked off in the first place, and it was because of her critiques of Israel. It's unquestionably true that the rage on the U.S. right towards Omar, greatly accentuated by her failure to be white, Christian, and a native-born man, the pullulating hate that Trump demonstrated to her in 2019 with the "go back to your country" stuff, is still bracing to read. Trump's tweets are hilariously stupid, given that of the four members of Congress, Omar was the only one born outside of the U.S., and Presley is from the faraway foreign land of Cincinnati, Ohio. So the right has an especially terrifying brand of venom reserved for someone like Omar. White Christian men certainly have far more wiggle room to tell the truth, but conservatives are perfectly capable of revving up their giant hate machine against anyone who wants to say things that make them uncomfortable. The upshot here is that all of us, everyone who thinks American politics don't have to be dominated by childish lies, are in this together. Omar is a truly courageous person who must be defended by everyone who values honesty. Understand, though, that this is both because it's right and the right thing to do, and because if you have a similar affection for reality, you're also on their list, and you better believe they'll eventually get you too. All right. Yeah, it's really, it does bring to really a great point, great article as always by John Schwartz, bringing to the point. It really was. It was kind of nagging at me. It was kind of eating me away a little bit, because I was like, why aren't they saying the true reason why this stuff happened? Why aren't they being kind of, at least clear and honest and open about it? And I think it was very kind of important to get that out as well. All right, let's go to Chicago, where on January 26th, community members packed the pews at New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church on the west side of Chicago, where the Grassroots Collaborative, a progressive organization, was holding a mayoral candidate forum alongside the People's Unity Platform Coalition. Candidates, including Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson, Illinois State Rep. Cam Buckner, and former Chicago Public Schools CEO Paul Vallis, organizer Jamal Green, and City Council member Roderick Sawyer vied for approval of the many union members and community activists ready to vote in the February 28th municipal primary for election. If no mayoral candidate receives over 50% of the vote, the top two vote-getters will proceed to a runoff in April. Not in attendance at the forum, however, was the incumbent Mayor Lori Lightfoot. 4 years ago, a similar scene played out at the Grassroots Collaborative's mayoral forum in the same church. Then Chicagoans were disgusted with outgoing Mayor Rahm Emanuel, and candidates included Lightfoot promising to reopen all mental health clinics, opposed a $95 million police training center, and the move to end tax subsidies to corporate developers. Lightfoot won the 2019 mayoral contest in a runoff several months after the forum, but key promises she made at the event and during her campaign have gone unfulfilled or turned into bitter standoffs with community leaders. She was all for an elected school board when she was running, but then we had to fight her on it. She was all for more oversight of the police, but when she got elected, we had to fight her for it, said Northside Action for Justice Board member Mark Kaplan. Mainly, everything she ran on, she flipped on quite quickly. Such sentiments may help explain why Lightfoot is facing a pretty tough road to re-election. As reported in The Atlantic in mid-January, poll after poll has shown Chicagoans to be in a sour mood. A mere 9% believe the city is headed in the right direction. Underwater on her approval rating, Lightfoot is not expected to win re-election next month, read the headline in The Atlantic. In a recent Wall Street Journal story reads that Mayor Lightfoot is facing stiff competition from a large field of candidates in her re-election bid as Chicago tackles crime and the lingering economic fallout of the COVID pandemic. And the thing is, Chicago is it's one of the cities where I think you have to, if you're following the left resurgence, if you're following the efforts made by left-wing organized labor and politics in the country, Chicago has to be one of the places you are most interested in. At CTU Local 1, probably, in my opinion, one of the best and most organized unions in this country, which is the Chicago Public Teachers Union and the school there. And they are always influential. Stacey Davis Gates is always influential when it comes to picking the mayor there and really, lining her excessive organizing muscle up behind the person who I believe this time their choice there is Brandon Johnson. But it is a big example to see, if a city, I'd say probably Michelle Wu, Boston, is in very good hands in terms of a very progressive leader of the city, a very progressive city council. The surrounding cities, Cambridge and Somerville, are perhaps even more left-wing, socially, economically, all that stuff in terms of the steps they're willing to take to make the city more accountable to more marginalized communities, more economically friendly for them, less pro-police, less pro-developer. They are leading there, and I think if the left gets someone like a Michelle Wu type figure, maybe Brandon Johnson could be that figure in power there. That will be a very, very huge deal. in terms of a legitimate win that the left could kind of notch as a kind of locus point for a bunch of organizing to kind of happen, and really good policy moves for a lot of different people to be tried out in a good environment. So a survey released in January by the Daily Line and Crane's Chicago business saw Lightfoot trailing significantly behind Jesus Troy Garcia, this is a Democrat of Illinois representative in Congress, Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallis, with 25% of those surveyed saying they back Garcia, and 25% saying they back Johnson, with 15% choosing Vallis, and 11% for Lightfoot. That was a big poll that caught a lot of people's eyes. Incumbent mayor in fourth place, and that is a very, very big deal there. Let's see what we have. New poll shows 22% of Chicago voters undecided in mayor's race, with 16% Lightfoot, 14% for Willie Wilson at 14%. Let's take a look at the new poll here. Let's see. It is 554 Chicago voters say Lightfoot on 16, Willie Wilson on 14, and Paul Vallis on 10. This was it. It's 1983 labs. This honestly does not sound too incredibly reliable there. And I think if Garcia was on 25, no way the vote is. It's got to be. I think it's got to be a little bit more spread out. I'll try to get some better polling data for you here. Early voting off to a slow start. This is the January 23rd. January 23rd is the most recent one. It has Lightfoot and Paul Vallis neck and neck, but it is definitely something that will be very interesting. Her campaign said, her campaign says in its own mid-January polling had her ahead with 25% of respondents, followed by Vallis on 22. Yeah, that was a poll we just saw there when I looked it up. And Garcia on 18. Other more recent polls, including one from ITQ Strategies released early February, have shown Lightfoot trailing and her fellow candidates competing for frontrunner status. Regardless of poll numbers, though, Lightfoot is facing voter discontent across the political and socioeconomic spectrums, from community activists and progressives who once backed her. In May 2021, halfway through her term, the AP reported on the disappointment of former Lightfoot supporters. "I thought she governed like she campaigned, and we didn't get that," said Northside resident Cassandra Kazocha, adding, "We got a very dictatorial style of governing, just like we did with Rahm, and it's disappointing." This month, 3rd Ward Alderman Pat Dowell, one of Lightfoot's longtime allies on the city council, announced her endorsement of the perceived progressive in the race, Brandon Johnson, who I would say, based on everything I've seen, seems to be the most progressive person in the race as well. Meanwhile, leaders and activists who were suspicious of Lightfoot's progressive credentials during her 2019 campaign say they feel vindicated. Saki Badi, a co-executive director of the Action Center on Race and the Economy, wrote a story for In These Times during the election calling for a mayor who would break with Emmanuel and the Daily's record of catering for the wealthy. Badi, speaking in his personal capacity, not for the organization, says that in 2019 he did not see Lightfoot as the leader the city needed and feels just as strongly now. We'll continue to follow that story as it evolves. Primary under a month away. 3 weeks away, probably. Was it this Tuesday, actually? All right, let's go to our story here in Jacobin by Luke Savage. A particular scene, at once horrifying and grotesque, has become increasingly common to America's major cities. With the blessing of municipal authorities, the failings of police stormtroopers descends on a concentration of homeless residents before dispersing them and destroying their belongings. In the years since the 2008 financial crisis, one not incidentally rooted in a Wall Street-driven collapse of the housing market, the number of homeless encampments across the country has dramatically increased, and authorities have responded in kind with escalating brutality. Fueling the growth of encampments has unsurprisingly been a sharp increase in homelessness, itself driven by soaring rents and chronically inadequate supply of affordable housing. According to one analysis from the National Center on Homelessness and Poverty, a single 5% increase in rents in a major city as Los Angeles can force as many as 2,000 people onto the streets. The same study found that the number of encampments nationwide rose 1,342% in the years between 2007 and 2017. Given the measurable increase in homelessness since, there's reason to believe the figure is even higher today. In the wake of these developments, big city mayors and councils have leaned heavily on draconian law and order approaches that aim less to address the root of the cause of homelessness than the visibility of those experiencing it. Just getting out of the way for people makes people uncomfortable, makes people think there's a lot of high crime in this area if people see homeless people on the street, and that, crime, as always, it's been a perception, how you experience how safe your, society is around you. And if you see homeless people just camping out on the street, especially in a big, again, one of those tents, oh, so scary. But that tends to make things not look good at all. As Eugene Stroman, a homeless resident of Houston, explained in 2017, those living in encampments often have very good reasons to prefer encampments and refuse police offers of relocation to a shelter. As he says, there are reasons to say no when officers offer to bring you to a shelter. Agreeing to go to a shelter in that moment means losing many of your possessions. You have to pack up what you can in a bag and leave the rest behind, to be stolen or thrown away by city workers. For me, I would have lost my bulky winter clothes, my tent, my non-perishable food, all the bike parts I used to make repairs for money. You give all this property up just for the guarantee, if you trust the police, of a spot on the floor for one night. It's not really a choice for me to give up all those resources. I need to make smart survival decisions. Contrary to what authorities claim, encampment sweeps therefore have done little except make life harsher for the unhoused. Evidence is scant that encampments can actually be linked to increases in crime, but as Malcolm Harris observed last year, the homeless often serve as a convenient scapegoat for officials who would rather outsource social policy to bloated police departments than build public housing. There is considerable evidence, however, that cities are in fact spending more on criminalizing and displacing homeless people than it would cost to provide them a good place to live. Likes of sweeps, incarceration, enforcement, and anti-panhandling laws, and hostile architecture, after all, have come with a hefty price tag estimated to be more than $31,000 per person per year. The annual cost of providing supportive housing, according to the same analysis, is $10,051, or less than a third of the cost of criminalization. So, a pretty big deal there, to say the least. There is, in other words, nothing rational about the way American cities are opting to respond to homelessness. The hostile posture of local governments and police departments towards the unhoused reflects neither reason nor ineffective policymaking, but instead a disproportionate influence or of affluent property owners on elected officials, the noxious reliance of policing as a panacea for social ills, and public policy consensus that continues to view housing more as a vehicle for speculative investment than a basic human need, and the wider hollowing out of America's social contract of all that entails. As the richest country in the world, America has at its disposal the resources and know-how to see every person housed and afforded the necessities of life. Allowing it to be otherwise, quite simply, is a choice. And on that note, we are going to say so long for today, and we will return to Newsflash on Friday.